left. My name's Eric. For those of you that are familiar with me, I'm the CTO here at Mindsight. And really, my responsibilities here are helping find the technical direction for the company, as well as working with our solutions architects to find those solutions to meet your needs. So it's one of the reasons why I'm really excited about the presentation today. I think what we've identified here with the modern desktop and some of the new advancements in AWS and Azure a really exciting time. It's a really exciting product that Nick will be going over with. Nick is there on the right, the much more handsome and well-dressed individual picture there. Nick's one of our senior solutions, or excuse me, our senior engineers and one of our cloud solution architects. Various certifications he has and very knowledgeable on this product and this line. So with that, we'll start to talk a little bit about the presentation. I'm sure you guys have been on a ton of webinars and they can have a tendency to be kind of dry. So we're going to try something new today that we've never done before. There are certain slides in our presentation where we're going to pause for questions. So if you could, in the bottom right, as we're going through the presentation, they're in that chat feature that Kim spoke about. Make sure you select all panelists and type in your question. Be selecting the best question throughout the presentation today. And when we get to those pause sections, I'll ask that question. We'll present that question to Nick and the panel. Whoever selected as the best will receive a $25 gift card to Amazon. So want to try to make it a little interesting and some more participation in these events and these webinars. We know they can be kind of dry. So with that, Nick, you want to slide to the next slide for me? So a little bit about the agenda today. We talk about the modern workspace, obviously, and how it's evolved. I think it's pretty important for us to understand where we come from to where we're going and why the advantages of what the offers are today. Desktop as a service and how it differs, again, from previous installations of VDI and the benefits that it brings to you as an organization. Obviously, this topic has never been more relevant than it is today with the current work from home situations with COVID that we're all fighting under. There's some really interesting synergy that these offers have for us to meet those challenges. So, and then licensing advancements that have made this a lot more economical and manageable from a standpoint of delivery for our IT organizations. So, with that, Nick will be covering all these topics. Please ask questions, participate, take advantage of the $25 gift card, and thank you for joining us today. Over to you, Nick.
Thanks, Eric. Appreciate the introduction. All right, let's dig in. So what is the modern workplace? As we begin, we must first ask ourselves, what is the modern workplace? Most of you joining us today probably already have an idea that comes to mind. And speaking about the modern workplace, we're referring to a workplace that has continued to both evolve and adapt to the needs of businesses and employees alike. Gone are the days of commuting to and from the office every day from 9 to 5, working in an assigned cubicle with a stationary desktop, jumping from conference room to attend each meeting. Desktops have been replaced with laptops to allow for greater flexibility, conference rooms with virtual meeting rooms to allow for better communication and collaboration, cubicles with shared spaces, or just simply not being required to be in the office altogether. As you can see from the graphic behind us here, Microsoft defines the modern workplace as a collection or packages of services in an offering in the cloud that combine to create an IT infrastructure that can continue to both grow and adapt to your business needs over time without having to worry about the underlying hardware. Microsoft is shifting to more of a service-based infrastructure. Today's workspace must be flexible. It must promote collaboration. It must empower the employee by providing them the tools to be creative and productive both wherever and whenever. In order for this change to occur, businesses must both adopt and implement an IT infrastructure that has also evolved as both demand and business needs have changed. We've seen this over the years with virtualization, IP telecommunications, and now more and more with organizations moving their infrastructure to the cloud or adopting a hybrid cloud strategy. Today's workplace calls for even more. This is no more apparent than the recent coronavirus pandemic that we're struck with today. Now more than ever, businesses rely on technology to enable a remote workforce to work both efficiently and productively from remote locations during this crisis. In order to do so, businesses are relying on technology and automation to scale up to meet the increased demand as needed with little to no administrative interaction. We're now in the second wave of this evolution, as more and more organizations are moving their IT infrastructure to the cloud or taking advantage of SaaS or DaaS offerings today. Today, I'd like to take the time to talk to you more specifically about the evolution of traditional on-premise and cloud-based VDI environments and the benefits of new desktop as a service offerings available here. Most of you joining us here today are probably familiar with VDI environments. For those of you that aren't, in VDI, a hypervisor segments servers into virtual machines that in turn host virtual desktops.
Hey, Nick.
Yes.
It's Eric. Hey, your voice is pretty choppy. So I've got a couple of requests. Can we pivot this? Can you call in? Let's see if it works better over voice. I assume you're on.
That is correct. Give me just one moment here.
And Steve, I see your hand raised. Is that what your point was? I'm unmuting you. Or you just. Steve, you're unmuted. Was that what your question was?
Yeah, I was gonna mention that. I was actually gonna jump off and jump back on, thinking it was my connection. But if everybody else is hearing that as well, then
Yeah, we were circling amongst ourselves trying to verify that it was us and not, or it was on that side. So thank you for that. All right, I'm putting you back on mute though.
Okay. I should be called in here in just a moment, folks. I do apologize.
Yeah, and of course now Nick sounds fine as he's talking to us and dialing in on the phone. But
yep, I should be back in here. Everybody, let me know if can you hear me okay, Eric? Is
yeah,
better?
sure can.
Okay, perfect. All right, if at any point it starts to chop out again, just let me know and we'll see if we can adjust here. All right. So for those of you that aren't familiar with VDI, in VDI, hypervisor segment servers into virtual machines that in turn host virtual desktops. Users can access these virtual desktops from any device or location, and all processing is done on the host server. VDI, or virtual desktop infrastructure, took shape around 2006 when desktop virtualization was beginning to gain pace in the end user computing market. It was different from a session host deployment in the sense that VDI gave each user their individual desktop rather than providing a desktop session on the same server, which was previously the case. This meant being able to provide your users with a more customized desktop experience without the need for individual PCs. VDI offers a number of advantages, such as user mobility, ease of access, flexibility, and greater security. It is also easier to manage than having to manage individual PCs. In the past, its high performance requirements made it costly and challenging to deploy on legacy systems, which posed a barrier for entry for most businesses. However, the rise in enterprise adoption of hyperconverged infrastructure offers a solution that provides scalability and high performance at a lower cost. The key here is that administrators could now manage the environment in a centralized manner rather than needing to support individual machines, and users were given the flexibility to access those machines from virtually anywhere on a varying platform of devices. This was a critical step in the IT evolution. Now, while this was a critical step in IT evolution, that did not mean that it was void of challenges. Let's talk now a little bit about some of the challenges with on-premise and cloud-based VDI deployments. When talking about the challenges with on-premise deployments, a few issues are going to arise. You have the management and implementation issues. The implementation of VDI means that a company itself manages the infrastructure. If VDI is deployed on-premise, it requires a huge force of IT professionals to look after in terms of maintenance and setup. The cost of the deployment will always be a factor when we talk about VDI. While you're saving in the area of not having to purchase individual PCs, you're left with a hefty upfront cost for the infrastructure, both network and compute. Resources must be purchased with peak usage in mind when the system may or may not be frequently running at maximum capacity. Keep this in mind as this is critical to understanding the cost savings that can be provided by desktop as a service later in this conversation. Licensing for VDI can be both confusing and expensive. You must purchase licenses for the infrastructure, users who are accessing the environment, as well as the cost of the software and support on each product. VDI, like any other technology, needs to be upgraded from time to time. Imagine a company that invests a large sum of revenue in VDI only to find out that it needs to upgrade after every few years. Also, the more a company's size increases, the more resources have to be scaled, which incurs more money and effort. Many of the issues that plague IT admins and executives alike are also issues within the cloud space. VDI infrastructure still needs to be managed, implemented, and maintained by IT staff. In terms of licensing and upgrade, the same licensing and upgrade concerns that plague on-premise deployments are also a concern in the cloud. You will likely have to pay for each portion of the deployment, infrastructure, user licenses, software licenses, and now you have the addition of paying for a cloud subscription. In terms of cost, moving to the cloud may not be less expensive than your on-premise VDI resources. In fact, one of the biggest issues with moving to the cloud can be estimating the costs associated with that instance. Since most cloud bills are based on resource consumption, this makes it difficult for a 24-hour facility as costs can increase dramatically as machines will be running around the clock regardless of how heavily they are used during that time period. You're also left with less control. The cloud is essentially a compute rental within somebody else's data center. This means your computing resources are not running under your full control at all times. You can deploy cloud-based virtual desktops and servers, reboot them, assign network configurations, but the ultimate ownership of that data center belongs to the provider. The ability to troubleshoot can also become more complex because you don't have access to the base hypervisor. If infrastructure servers are controlled by a third party, such as Citrix Cloud, it's not possible to self-help by reviewing the Citrix gateway or delivery controller logs in order to better assess the issue. Instead, you're forced to work with tech support to resolve many of these issues. I'm sure we've all encountered this at some point, as it's a common pain point for most cloud-based deployments. Not having access to raw logs or individual components can cause the time spent to troubleshoot to grow exponentially. As mentioned earlier, as our business and technology needs have evolved, so too has VDI. VDI is now being offered as a cloud service or desktop as a service, DaaS, as we'll reference it throughout this slide deck. In this case, the host provides all the required resources to run the desktop environment and any application within it, as well as storing and saving data for each user session. While VDI and desktop as a service are very similar, there are a few key differences among them. You can think of desktop as a service as a fully outsourced solution that provides virtual desktops to businesses. This means no maintenance, management for the IT staff. The host provides all the required resources to run the desktop environment and any application within. As we can see here in the graphic, the different components traditionally associated with VDI are now completely being managed by Microsoft, that being the gateway, broker, load balancer, as we see at the top portion of the screen. You'll also notice that Microsoft is including versions of Windows, such as Windows 7 Enterprise, which are currently unsupported and on-prem versions that have recently reached end of life. This in itself may be enough for some organizations stuck on older operating systems or older applications to try and stretch the life of those applications. Another key difference between traditional VDI and desktop as a service offerings is that the cost of deploying and maintaining the hardware required to run each virtual desktop shifts from a capital expense to an operational expense, or CapEx to OpEx. I'm sure most of the audience understands the difference between capital expenses and operational expenses, but it's worth pointing out this briefly as it's a big benefit to offering desktop as a service and the ability to pay for the expenses over a set term and further reduce the costs by leveraging multiple efficiencies rather than having to cough up a huge amount of change up front for predetermined amount of resources. Let's take a look at some of the additional benefits of desktop as a service solutions. Outsourcing desktop virtualization to the cloud provides greater flexibility, mobility, and general ease of experience from virtual desktop users and administrators. Companies can take advantage of auto-scaling technology that allows the deployment to either scale up or scale down based on demand. As a result, costs can be minimized. This is crucial to saving on costs in the cloud space. Desktop as a service benefits can include easier patch management, software updates, faster user migrations, quicker user provisioning, and better disaster and recovery planning, as well as improved application and data security. Users can also benefit from desktop as a service by being able to access corporate data and applications throughout a desktop experience on a wide range of either company provided or bring your own devices. You might be saying to yourself, that sounds interesting, but who's currently offering desktop as a service today? What does it cost? There are two primary players in this arena, AWS Workspaces and Microsoft Windows Virtual Desktop, or WVD. In fact, Amazon and Microsoft are two of the most fully featured as well as expansive providers of remote desktop infrastructure today. Amazon Remote Workspaces was first to market as Workspaces was fully launched in March 2014. This gave them an overall 4-year head start when compared to Microsoft Virtual Desktop, which was launched late September 2018. That being said, both companies have world-class infrastructures and are actively developing their capabilities of their services. Here at Mindsight, we are both AWS and Microsoft partners as we try to be as vendor agnostic as possible. Both are great options when planning your move to the cloud. However, this webinar will focus more on Azure for a few reasons. First, Microsoft is offering a new license platform called M365 that we'll be discussing in later slides. This makes the change to desktop as a service even more appealing as the new licensing package includes an array of services and features all bundled into one license, something AWS is not currently doing today. There are also features such as multi-session desktops and FS Logic, which was recently acquired by Microsoft, that are exclusive to the Windows platform. While AWS Remote Workspaces was the first to market, Microsoft claims that Azure beats AWS in terms of cost. This should be taken with a grain of salt, of course, as costs can vary on the scale of usage. Microsoft, however, does offer case studies to back up these claims. They do a bank on the use of certain technologies, such as Windows licensing, discussed earlier in our slide, to explain the cost difference between Azure and AWS solutions. If you're interested in reviewing these case studies, the link can be found below in the right-hand corner of the slide deck. Let's discuss some of the key features of Windows Virtual Desktop. WVD allows you to create a full desktop virtualization environment in your Azure subscription without having to run any additional gateway servers. Leveraging Virtual Desktop as a service allows for you to skip the need and complexity in managing multiple servers you would find in a typical remote desktop deployment. This also allows you to skip the need to manually update and patch your servers. You can leverage as many host pools as you need to accommodate your diverse workloads. You can either scale up or scale out your infrastructure on demand. This allows administrators to reduce costs with pooled multi-session resources. Windows 10 Enterprise multi-session capability is exclusive to Windows Virtual Desktop. With multi-session capabilities, you can greatly reduce the number of virtual machines and operating system overhead while still providing the same resources to your users. It also allows multiple concurrent interactive sessions that previously only Windows Server could deliver. This capability gives users a familiar Windows 10 experience while allowing IT to benefit from the cost advantages of multi-session and use existing per-user Windows licensing instead of RDS client access licenses or CALs. Anyone who has dealt with implementing and managing an RDS farm will appreciate this fact. The key here is that you no longer need to create the session within Windows Server, but rather you are creating multiple sessions on a Windows 10-based machine, providing you the comfort, look, and feel of a typical Windows 10 machine. As you can see from the slide, this also brings along support for modern apps such as Edge, Cortana, the Office 365 Pro Plus suite, all combined with automated semi-annual updates. FX Logic, profile management within RDS infrastructures, has long been a pain point for IT admins alike. Microsoft has provided us so many options for managing profiles such as roaming profiles, user profile disks, folder redirection, or a combination between amongst the three. Windows Virtual Desktop profile management through FS Logic takes care of those painful limitations. FX Logic was acquired by Microsoft in late 2018 and is now provided to properly licensed WVDD users at no additional cost, which is a key benefit. Microsoft acquired FS Logic for better profile management of the user's profiles that roam through all pooled session hosts. Anyone who has had the experience managing a VDI environment understands the headaches associated with user profiles. But for me, this also means no more issues with the Windows Start menu, which I'm extremely happy about. FX Logic relies on a powerful tool called profile containers. What a profile container does is it packs a user profile to a VHDX file and then stores it in a file share. These VHDX files can be mounted through the network when the user logs in and demounted when the user logs out. To reduce network traffic, FS Logic brings a caching mechanism called Cloud Cache. It caches profile files to the local client machine. With all these advantages, the beauty of FX Logic is that it doesn't actually need an extra license, but it comes pre-bundled in the WVD license pack. Because user profiles and data are not stored on the desktop host, the host can be added, destroyed, or replaced easily without worrying about user data being lost. This is key when thinking in terms of auto-scaling the solution. You want to be able to destroy the machine at any given time. There's also benefits for Office 365 built apps too, also built into the solution. The Outlook OST cache file, Outlook Search, OneDrive for Business, and other application data is stored in the container, so it follows the user from WVD host to WVD host. Profiles are stored on the network share, but instead of being downloaded and attached to a WVD host when the user logs in, they're accessed directly over the network, which provides a much faster logon experience. The network redirection is hidden, so it appears as if they were local profiles, eliminating the compatibility issues. FX Logic provides a few key advantages: improved performance through profile containers, OneDrive management, in which FX Logic's profile containers enable support for OneDrive and non-persistent RDSH or VDI spaces, additional folders, in that FX Logic enables to extend user profiles to include additional folders, allowing for better flexibility when deploying apps. Virtual desktop profile management has been a challenge for a long time, but the profile management through FX Logic now aims at a more flawless deployment. I know this was a lot of information, and we want to ensure that we're covering all of our bases here, so please submit questions to the entire panel, and we'll select one question to answer. Those that submit questions will have a chance to win one of 4 $25 Amazon gift cards. We'll take these questions now.
So the one question I've gotten so far is from Ryan O'Halloran, is will you be provided the recording and the slide deck? And yes, we'll be able to provide those. So now, full disclosure, Ryan used to work for Timpani years ago. I don't know if you should be qualified to win this. I'm just giving you a hard time, Ryan. But obviously, please participate. We want to give away these gift cards, so ask questions. The goal here was really to try to liven up the presentation. We know webinars are tough when you can't have that physical, personal interaction that we would normally do when one of these presentations. So, thank you, Nick. I'll probably turn it back over to you. I haven't got any more questions in as of yet, so why don't we just keep rolling?
All right, sounds good. Next, we'll turn our attention to elasticity and auto scaling. The ability to scale up or scale out your deployment both on demand and automatically is a key feature in WVD architecture that allows IT professionals in the enterprise space to deploy and manage large Windows virtual desktop environments and Microsoft Azure automatically. Auto scaling leverages dynamic host pools that automatically grow and shrink depending on the workload, and desktop images used to centrally manage up to tens of thousands of users. These and other unique features reduce cost and simplify ongoing management and support to end users. First and foremost, it's important to understand the different components of WVD desktop pools. As you can see here from the slide, the image below, there are 3 key components. We have the golden image desktop, we have the desktop pool template, and the individual session host VMs. The golden image is the standard image for your entire environment. All pool desktop template VMs and individual user virtual desktop sessions will get created from this base GI. WVD desktop pool template is where most of the customization begins. It's the standard for every session host within that specific pool. Our partners sometimes ask us why we should create multiple pools. Couldn't we just place all the users into one single pool? Well, in theory, that would be possible, but there are many reasons to assign different users to different pools. Let's take a look at 2 different examples. first example being more of a performance-related example. Let's say you have 3 different user types: task users, knowledge users, power users. You wouldn't want to put all of them into a single desktop pool based on a single desktop template. A single user could then max the resources of a lower VM series, making any subsequent users who log in experience slowness because of low system resources. In contrast, a task user assigned to a large VM series pool might have a session host spun up that's 10 times larger than what they need for their session. How about in terms of geographic location? In a large deployment that we have locations across the country or the world, you wouldn't want session hosts to begin scaling in at the end of the day for the East Coast branch and subsequently cause performance issues on the West Coast branch. Similarly, you wouldn't want extra VMs left running when not required, simply to accommodate the different time zones. Separating these locations into their own separate WVD desktop pools solves these issues. Again, I know there was a lot of information there, so I did want to pause for some questions around WVD session pools and how that works, if we have any.
So Nick, I did get a question in from Brian. It's not related to the session pools. He actually got it right in the wire before on the last pause break, and I missed it. But his question was, how does DaaS allow end user Zoom meetings? Is this not recommended?
That is a good question. When it comes specifically to Zoom meetings, I'm not sure if I have the best answer there. How about you, Eric?
Yeah, so I 100% know that we can support Microsoft Teams, voice and video chat within the Windows Virtual Desktop platform. I don't see any reason why Zoom specifically would not be compatible. Windows Virtual Desktop is capable of running high intensity video applications or graphic intensive applications like AutoCAD, etc. There is capabilities to add in extra graphic processors to the desktop pools. So that functionality, I'm not really concerned. I'm 95% confident that Zoom is supported within that. I will get you a definitive answer though for that, Brian.
Yeah, I wouldn't think there's anything specific to Zoom in a WVD deployment, and that was kind of my concern is, yeah, in most cases you wouldn't have an issue, but specific to Zoom, I'd like to make sure we double check just before we answer that. Cool. Any other additional questions, or should we hop in and continue along here?
Yep. Let me double check and make sure another one. There are a couple more that came in. When we looked at VDI, it was too costly for us to consider. Isn't DaaS going to be just as costly? Isn't it just transferring from CapEx to DaaS? So I'll handle that one actually.
Okay.
Yeah, you don't want to know what? Nick kind of talked on this a little bit. The reason why I'm interested in this desktop as a service solution as opposed to traditional VDI is really centered around when we did VDI before, we always had to buy for our max utilization. So we were always buying enough gear that we could handle all of our user base, plus some headroom and plus some growth. Even though in a lot of environments, we're always only using a subset of our users are ever using that VDI system at any given time. That's really where the economics here of the desktop as a service come into play, because we have that capability to auto scale up and down based on need. That, yeah, you're paying in an OpEx model, but you're paying for what you actually need at the time that you need it. So it changes that economics a little bit there. And that's why we're interested in this. As well as you're not coming up with that initial capital X expenditure to buy that gear and that hardware. You're spreading that out over the term that you're actually using the application or using the desktop as a service. Let's see, one more question.
Morgan, just one quick comment on that just before we get to the next question. So we are going to be covering in future slides here how we can reduce some of that cost and leverage efficiencies within the cloud space, which kind of makes up for a difference on that cost point. So we will be getting that to in later slides here in our presentation.
So that was Bill Love for the second gift card.
Awesome. Congrats, Bill.
All
right.
Yep, you can keep going, Nick.
Will do. All All right, so kind of bringing us back to exactly what we were talking about. Now that we know more about WVD and how it works, let's further discuss how we can combine multiple efficiencies to better optimize our costs. We know that compute and storage spend accounts for approximately 90% of total Azure costs when deploying virtual desktops. Let's focus on strategies that reduce the cost of these components. One simple and obvious strategy to reduce costs is to leverage Azure virtual instances for virtual machines running the desktop workloads. This is a good first step, but it doesn't go far enough in making Azure as efficient as possible. An Azure reserved instance allows you to run your production workloads at a reduced cost by committing to run those workloads over a specific period of time. If you know that you're going to always have a minimum amount of machines running during that time, this is a good play. 3-year compute reservations save roughly 50 to 60% of the compute costs over time, whereas a single-year reservation is going to save you approximately 30% or so. Once a reservation is purchased, it makes no sense to deallocate or destroy desktop VMs since the capacity has already been prepaid for, and the resources will continue to run 24/7. Because a typical work week for a virtual desktop user is about 50 hours, which is roughly 30% of the time, it becomes apparent that using a 3-year reservation doesn't save us as much as we would with a finely tuned auto-scaling system. Would by deallocating or even better, destroying VMs when they're no longer in use and recreating them when they are needed. Furthermore, if we consider the cost of managed disks as part of this equation, then reservations become even less compelling since the OS disks associated with each reserved instance must continue to exist and be paid for. As a matter of fact, any auto-scaling mechanism that deallocates VMs and leaves the OS disk intact is not optimized. Even if the OS disk has no unique user data, it's still causing the storage meter to run. Given this, it becomes apparent that a mechanism is needed that can optimize compute and storage Azure costs by creating desktop VMs on demand and destroying them when they're no longer needed. Such an auto-scaling mechanism can provide significant savings above and beyond reserved instances and beyond simply just powering on and off the VMs. Let's take a look at a couple of sample use cases. So here we can see we have a sample use case that consists of 1,000 virtual desktop users with all users on desktops during peak demand. 100 of those users are on desktops 24 hours a day. We can also see that we're leveraging premium SSD disks for this example. So let's talk about how we can best optimize this solution. First, let me start out by saying that it's important to keep in mind that these prices are used as an example and that not all instances are going to be priced the same. This very much depends on the amount of machines and sizing of each machine. The E8 SC3 series, which was used for this particular example, is a memory optimized series. So as we can see here, our first scenario depicts a traditional on-demand instance. As you can see, the total comes out to around $18 per user. One thing to keep in mind and pay attention to here is the actual machines that are running and the associated cost as we go through each scenario. Scenario 2 shows us the cost that we would incorporate with a 1-year reserved instance, not leveraging any kind of auto-scaling technology. As we can see, the costs are reduced to around $12 a user. We can also see our machine instances have gone from $17,000 a month down to around $10,000 a month. Scenario 3 provides us a bit more cost efficiency by committing to a 3-year reserved instance, which will put us more around the $8 a user mark, which is much better than where we originally started with the pay-as-you-go model, but still not quite optimized as much as we possibly can. You will notice, however, the cost to run those machines has dropped significantly from around $10,000 to about $7,000 a month. If we wanted to, we could optimize the solution even further by leveraging auto-scale functionality, which has been mentioned throughout this webinar. By implementing auto-scaling, either schedule or event-based, we could further reduce these costs by up to 75% of the original cost leveraging the pay-as-you-go model by automatically terminating resources that are going unused. Likewise, we can increase performance by automatically spinning up VMs as needed. As you can see from our previous slide deck, where we started out at about $17,000 a month, we're really dropping that cost down, and this is where the big savings come in, to about $700 a month. The key thing to point out here, however, is that we went from 40 machines running at all times down to 4, leveraging a reserved instance, a minimum amount we know that we're going to need running, and 36 VMs being spun up on demand as needed. That's where the real cost savings are coming in this equation. Finally, before we wrap up, I'd like to briefly review the new Microsoft 365 licensing model that we've been referencing throughout this webinar. Microsoft 365 was introduced in late 2017 as a new product bundle which combines the traditional Office 365 features with Enterprise Mobility Plus security and Windows 10 licensing, which is key. This provides the end users with a complete compute productivity solution. Windows 10 Enterprise licenses can be used to license virtual desktops in Windows Virtual Desktop deployments at no additional cost. And this license set includes Office 365 E3, which is going to provide you some of the same features that you're familiar with previous Office 365 licensing models, such as Exchange Online, a terabyte of OneDrive data, SharePoint, Teams, you name it. It also includes Enterprise Mobility and Security Plus licensing, as mentioned earlier, which allows admins to leverage solutions such as Microsoft Intune, MDM, Azure MFA, Advanced Threat Protection, and email hygiene and security solutions. These are a crucial component of keeping your cloud infrastructure secure, and it's added at no cost. Below, we can see some of the differences between the standard Office 365 licensing model and the new Microsoft 365 licensing model. As mentioned previously, this new licensing model includes most, if not all, the features of previous Office 365 plans, but now includes Windows 10 Enterprise licensing and Mobile Security Plus. The new licensing model is available in 3 different flavors: Microsoft 365 Business, designed for 300 users or less; Microsoft 365 Enterprise, which is designed for larger scale organizations that need stronger security and device management, mentioned earlier; and Microsoft 365 Education, which is a basic plan designed for students and teachers alike. You'll notice that many of the previous business plans have now rolled into the new Microsoft 365 plans. So business, business premium, etc. So what do we take away from all this? Windows Virtual Desktop is an exciting, relatively new offering from Microsoft that provides you with desktop as a service. By leveraging desktop as a service, you're providing your company a more cost-effective solution while allowing your users to both be more productive and efficient while leveraging automation in a well-architected environment. Windows Virtual Desktop provides key features such as multi-session capabilities and FX logic for better profile management exclusive to Microsoft without the need to manage underlying infrastructure. Microsoft's new licensing model includes many of these features and services, all bundled into a single license at no additional cost. Sound interesting? The Workplace Evolution, a report published by Harvard Business Review, found that 78% of senior executives in the enterprise businesses believe fostering a modern workplace strategy is essential. However, only 31% think that their company is forward-thinking enough to do so. If building out a modern workplace strategy is something that you're interested in and you'd like to explore further, Eric will talk to you a little bit about more of an offering that we're providing today. Thank you.
All right. Let's actually, before I get into that offer, Nick, I got a flurry of questions here on the back end of this. And I believe we still have a gift card or two to give out. So Aaron came with the question that what will the endpoints look like? Are they Windows OS still? And what licenses are still needed for the endpoints? So kind of 3 questions in there. Do you want to handle that? So the first one.
So it's gonna look like a typical Windows 10 machine is what the endpoint's gonna look at. You mentioned the additional licensing requirement.
Mm-hmm. So the first question, what's the endpoint, right? And then what OS, and then what license still needs to be.
So it's going to be a Windows 10 OS. That's going to be your endpoint in this case. Licensing is going to be this new Microsoft 365 business license that's going to give your users all the same functionality such as you would have with previous E3 licensing sets, but it also includes the license for the actual Windows Virtual Desktop included in that one single bundled suite.
Yeah, I'm going to jump in and add a little bit more color there. So with the Windows Virtual Desktop, your VDI pools running in the cloud, you can actually access that from any of numerous types of devices. So it could be a thin client running an OS, it could be a mobile device, an Android, an iPhone. What Microsoft has is a small client that is loaded onto your machine, and that client's the up to the cloud, and then you can interface with that workstation from there. So that's how we can actually service the desktop, provide the desktop from accessible to your end user. From a license standpoint, like Nick was saying, that M365 license is really interesting because it comes with your Windows Enterprise Desktop OS license. Okay. So, usually we used to buy these with our hardware, or we had a Microsoft SLA, or a Microsoft agreement that entitled us to certain. Now they've kind of moved that licensing into an subscription-based model and bundled it with the O365 subscriptions that we're very familiar with for the Office suite of tools. So interesting here to change that model makes it much more consumable and then scalable as well, up and down. All right, a couple other questions. Jason asked about antivirus. Nick, you want to handle that one?
So you have the availability to deploy your own AV solution within the Windows Virtual Desktop. You also have the advanced threat protection provided to you by Microsoft, which is also included. That's it.
So embedded in that Microsoft 365 is the Enterprise Mobility and Security that entitles you to Microsoft's Advanced Threat Defender. So their antivirus, anti-malware solution. Cool. Trying to think. There's a couple other questions. Yep, I'm getting. Brian asked, how would a resource-intensive app like Autodesk Suite work, or Adobe Photoshop and video editing tools?
How would it work, or how would you increase performance around it?
How would it work? I think we kind of talked about this one before. You have the capacity inside the Azure Cloud and Windows Virtual Desktop to attach graphic processing power to the Windows Virtual Desktop. It obviously, it's a subscription and increase the cost, but it can be done, and those resource-intensive applications can be handled in a Windows Virtual Desktop environment.
Right. And you can also choose to scale up or scale out depending on your metrics there. So if you're hitting a high RAM capacity, you can set different thresholds and being able to manage that.
A couple other questions. What about using Chromebook and Chrome OS as a client for connections? Again, they're Android. There is a Microsoft client. I believe it works on the Chromebooks. I know it works on the Android operating system, so I'd need to validate that. And let's see, what else? Oh, great one from Lee. How well does a virtual desktop strategy perform in a hybrid environment that includes 25% locally hosted applications versus 75% externally hosted applications by cloud or private cloud environments? It's a great question, Lee, and it's going to take a lot more diving into. Every application is different, whether it's a thick client or a thin client, or really a web-based application. So each of those are kind of unique scenarios and use cases. That's one of the reasons why we would like to do, either POCs or testing beforehand to validate that. There's no real easy answer for me to say, yes, it's going to work, or no, it's not. Software as a service applications obviously should be no problem, but some applications are latency dependent and have concerns around that we can't guarantee. So, all right. So I think that's it for the questions. If there's any more, so I think our winners were Ryan, Aaron, and who else did I miss?
Bill also.
Yep, Bill Love.
Yep.
So those three will get the gift cards. I want to talk a little bit about this offer I have here. Obviously, this is a new offering from Microsoft, really the combination with the Microsoft licensing. So one of the things that we're doing, Mindsight has built a desktop as a service solution. And so what I'm offering today for the people in attendance here on this presentation is free implementation into the desktop as a service platform. Okay. That's obviously a pretty significant value. I'm doing it, one, to get it off the ground, because I'd like to see this take off. And so that's roughly, anywhere from 12 to 15K value. We have it right now to spin up the environment, get everything provisioned, and work on that. So my one stipulation here to take advantage of this promotion is that you need to send me an email by the end of the day today, setting up a meeting within the next 3 weeks to take advantage of this. Obviously, I know there's a lot more conversation that needs to go into this. There's a lot more thought that needs to go into it. So really, I'm just asking for the meeting today to be considered and to take advantage of that promotion, and have a meeting scheduled. Obviously, it's up to you which way you go, but at least we can roll out what it would look like, the cost around it in that meeting, and how you could take advantage of it. So that's really it from me. Obviously my email's there on the screen. You can also use the fancy scanned email to shoot me an email. It'll create the subject line for you and everything. But take advantage of that, and let's sit down and have a deeper conversation about desktop as a service. So with that, can we, Kim, and I'll need your help. Can I turn this on to ask any more questions if anyone wants to, or anyone want to raise their hand and ask any more questions? We've got some time.
Absolutely.
Here.
There's a couple in there. One, it's a follow-up from Brian about the Chromebooks. It was the concern that 20 years ago, video didn't work through Citrix. And so can we address, the advantages of this solution over what Citrix used to be?
Yeah, a lot of things have changed in 20 years. We know that video and Teams works and is supported on the Windows Virtual Desktop. Obviously, it's going to be we can validate that application works. That's one of the things I really like about this in the cloud is, like Nick has said several times, you can scale it up. So if it's a resource or a CPU, a RAM, a resource constraint issue, we can address that in the cloud without having to go through a procurement process or an upgrade process of physical hardware or being constrained by our physical hardware. So that's one of the values of having this in a cloud.
We've got another question about Active Directory and Cloud AD. How does this fit into that solution?
You want this one, Nick, or you want me to grab it?
Yeah, so when we stand up Windows Virtual Desktop instance, this is actually all provisioned and procured when we go ahead and package these services together to provide you your Windows Virtual Desktop. So as part of that, you're going to have Azure AD configured, spun up, DNS working, etc., all for the Windows Virtual Desktop deployment. So all of that is going to be packaged into the solution for you to go ahead and access these machines. Then you can then leverage further past that point, whether you want to implement AD Connect to begin synchronizing user identities, etc. There's further ways to then expand on that.
Thanks, Nick. And then we have a question about desktop seems to be based on connectivity. What happens when your primary and secondary ISPs go down?
Yeah. Obviously, with any cloud offering, you're dependent on your ability to access that cloud resource via the internet. So, really, when we're helping clients move to the cloud, that's one of the things that often gets overlooked is making sure we look and make sure there's resiliency in their circuit. And so we would really want to make sure that, like you said in yours, if you've got two circuits, that they're two independent circuits. Maybe they need to come in two different portions of the building, depending on your type of organization. But that is going to be a constraint, right? Obviously, if circuits go down and we're in a world like we are today, where we send everybody home, right? There'd be no change for a user that's working from home if you had implemented a desktop as a service as a cloud solution, right? The same desktop that they access when they're in the office, the same one they would be accessing from their home computers and devices. So there's pluses and minuses. One of the pluses is that, again, in a situation like we're in today, That desktop is available wherever they're at. But one of the penalties is you need to have resiliency in your circuit, and you need to have the ability to reach to the internet to get that.
I think it also, I mean, another benefit is also having to not worry about that local infrastructure for that connectivity piece. Microsoft is obviously a lot less likely to be unavailable in the event of a local outage. So I think that's another primary benefit there.
Kim, I like this a lot better with you reading me the question so that I can answer.
Not a problem. Let's see. Do we need to set up VPN tunnel for AD authentication?
Sure do. This is very similar to setting up an Azure tenant, right? You know, we're going to need connectivity. You're going to need connectivity on-prem to be able to do things like the AD integration that Nick talked about. Accessing the desktop, though, can happen from anywhere, right? So, you know, you're going to want the tunnel so that you can access resources from your on-prem infrastructure, but it's not the way your users access the desktop.
Okay, we got another endpoint question. How do you handle caching with non-Microsoft endpoint?
Caching with non-Microsoft endpoint. I'm not sure I understand that question.
Jason, if you're still on, I am going to unmute you so you can ask the question because I'm the least technical person on this call, probably.
So you say Chromebook works, right? Chromebook works, Android client works, but they don't have like user profile like directories. So how do you kind of caching?
Oh, I think I understand. I think I understand this question. Correct me if I'm wrong, but way FS Logic works is we're actually creating profile disks that are stored either on a file share, they can be stored in OneDrive. That's actually one of the huge benefits here with what FS Logic is doing is so when a user logs into the VDI, they're taking that profile disk and associating it to that session. That user now has access to all of their settings, their profile, you know, all the elements of their profile. Part of that being their cached OST from Exchange would be one of those things. That way you can, it's one, that user experience is similar to what you're used to with a physical desktop. You're absolutely correct. That was one of the pain points in previous VDI installations is that we'd have trouble with that caching as VMs got destroyed and rebuilt or, and that was really a problem. So. Nick.
Another portion to kind of add on to that. So in the instance where you have multiple sessions, you now have the ability with FX Logic where you're actually being provided multiple read. It's caching that local profile, that local VHD, and then you can actually access multiple different sessions, which was something you couldn't do with user profile disks before, to where you can access that and then not have to worry about any mismanagement of the data between the two sessions. So it'll cache that and then right back.
Yeah, I mean, to me, that's one of so there were a couple of things that really sparked this in my mind as a viable option now. And that FS Logic was one of them. The fact that Microsoft made the licensing easily consumable for all of the pieces and elements in here. And then the multi-session piece changed really the economics of how we consume cloud VDI solutions. You know, as Nick pointed out, cloud VDI had kind of been around for a while. But I didn't think the economics necessarily made sense. I think that's changed here. The M365 licensing was introduced late last year, and so that's really where we've come. And then the FS Logic's acquisition, also, I want to say last year.
I think that's it for questions, unless I've missed some. But we will pull up the chat data from this event, and we will be reaching out to you personally with the answers to your questions. So thank you for joining us, everybody.
Thank you.
Folks.